Welcome back to Squawk Box. Infrastructure back in play after Democrats took back control of the House. President Trump and key Democratic leaders, I should say, expressed interest in working together to invest in the country's crumbling roads, bridges, and more. Joining us right now is Norm Anderson. He is CGLA Infrastructure President and CEO. We've talked a lot about the potential for some kind of bipartisan something. Do you think that this is potentially at least one topic they have in common? Is there actually bipartisan interest in doing something for real?
Well, it looks like there is. They talk as if there is. And I think if you think about it, it looks like there could be a kind of a grand bargain, right? Because I was looking at the electoral map yesterday. It's the scariest thing you've ever seen, right? The coasts are blue. The whole rest of the country's red. But it's really Republicans rural and Republicans control the Senate. But the cities are controlled by Democrats. So you could imagine a scenario in which there's a huge amount of select 50 projects, get together, figure out how you make 50 projects work for both rural America and also urban America. And one place you start is broadband. You know, I was talking to Governor Hickenlooper the other day. Big problem for him, Democrat Colorado. Big problem for governors all over the country. How do you include people in this process?
So if you were to put together a bill, what do you think a bill looks like? Is it going to be a broadband bill of this? I mean, would it be one-offs like that? Or do you think there would actually be some kind of all-encompassing infrastructure bill?
You know what I would do? I wouldn't focus so much on a bill because I think a bill slows things down. I think we need a lot more leadership from Washington and from the White House. And I think you need something like an infrastructure czar, maybe in the White House, maybe outside of the White House. What we talk about is a National Infrastructure Council, similar to National Economic Council, because you don't. You know, if you talk to politicians, they're thinking about public works. Public works gets done in 2 or 3 years. Infrastructure is strategic. It lasts for 30 or 40 years. It takes 5 to 10 years to get the projects done. So you've
talked about public-private partnerships before.
Yeah.
What would something like that look like in the context of what just happened after this midterm election?
Well, for me, that's a super question, right? Because it's almost like the Democrats want to write that big check, as one congresswoman told me. Write the big check. Public funding, DeFazio talks about that. Republicans want to look at private investment. So again, you kind of get a grand bargain in terms of where would the money come from. I think the money comes from private investment, almost 25%. Maybe 25% comes from the public fund. You raise the gasoline tax a little bit. It's not going to take the whole thing. But there's also room for a national infrastructure bank, which I think starts to make sense. That's a big Democratic initiative.
You're right. These are a lot of Democratic initiatives. It's how you pay for it that's going to have real trouble.
That's the real issue.
That's why it seems like it's such an easy issue. It seems like there's a lot of common ground, but how you pay for it is the big nut.
Well, the other thing we've talked about, Becky, so many times is all the projects that we have on some of our project lists that are all privately funded, like the Texas Central Railway project, like some of the Anschitz's wind projects, transmission line projects, all of these sort of priority projects, transit projects, rail projects that are privately funded. Their problem is the regulatory and permitting piece of this. They're all still stuck in that process 2 years into the Trump administration. So we see a huge backlog in terms of projects that don't require any public funding.
Even the Keystone Pipeline, though, that Trump went ahead and said he approved as soon as he came in, is now being held up in the courts. So what happens?
Well, I think this is something that we have to talk about as a country, right? Because you look at the regulatory piece of this, and it's almost like a regulatory ownership blanket that the federal government throws over the market. If you look at the market, 80% of our infrastructure market is completely ring-fenced from private investment and from the private sector. 80% of it. No place else. China's not that bad. It's a big problem, and it's all done through the regulatory area. Look at airports. I mean, airports are municipally owned, but you can't do anything unless the FAA gives you permission.
What have the lessons, though, of Europe been when it comes to selling off, or at least these public-private partnerships, which have turned out to be more private partnerships than public, and the backlash that has happened as a result?
Right. So one of the, I mean, it's interesting, you know, talking about SAP. I was looking at that earlier this morning, at SAP's acquisition.
Of Qualtrics, right? This morning, yeah.
Of Qualtrics. For me, where we're going in terms of infrastructure is getting citizens involved, getting citizens much more involved in the priority projects, what they own, and getting them involved in owning some of the projects, right? So it stops being a public versus elite game and becomes an R game. That's one of the things that's really missing in infrastructure.
Okay. Norm, thank you. It's good to see you, sir.
Thank you. Nice
Appreciate
to see you.
it. Norm Anderson, CGLA, Infrastructure President and CEO.
When we come back, President Trump is back